Podcast. I'm Neil Thomas and he is Kevin James.
Neil and I are relishing this opportunity to interview improvisers, to talk to them about their history, about what improvisation means to them, how they go about doing it, and what they aspire to continue to do. Today, Neil, who have we got?
We're talking with Mr. Al Wunder.
Wow. Let's go.
Al Wunder.
Good morning, Neil Thomas.
Hi, Al. We're so excited to have you on this morning. We've been waiting for this opportunity to interview you. We want to acknowledge, before we start, how integral you've been to improvisation in Melbourne, improvisational maybe in Australia. Your teaching has been so foundational. There's been a whole generation of improvisers that are doing what they're doing because of you. And we're so excited to be able to both interview you and play a part in sort of helping to propagate your approach and your way of going about teaching and conceptualizing improvisation. So this is exciting for us.
For me too. I get a chance to talk to you two guys. I've been watched a few of these podcasts that you have put on, and it's been great. It's been wonderful just hearing the various ways that people have dealt with developing their personal improvised style.
El, let's start this morning with that simple question of when did improvisation start for you? When did it take your interest, and where did it all begin?
Okay. Well, the real tender sense of improvised performance really started back with my mentor, Alwin Nikolais, in New York City back in 1962. I took my first improvisation. He called it theory, but I took my first technique and theory classes with one of his principal dancers, Gladys Balin. And I started dancing really purely as a physical therapy to help strengthen a right leg that I had weakened by breaking it 4 different times in my early years. And so I started doing a technique class to strengthen that leg. And it was working okay. And I said, and I was enjoying the technique class a bit. So I started doing a second class a week with her. And that class included not only technique, but what Nikolai called theory, and that was actually improvisation. And that was magic for me. I suddenly experienced a language, a physical language that was so much more, meant so much more to me than verbal language. Because, probably a couple of reasons, because of my hearing loss and the isolated times I had with broken legs. I wasn't very verbal. I wasn't a very chatty person. So I didn't feel any sense of strong communication with people through speaking. But when I started improvising, especially with Nikolai's 4 major forms of creating composition, time, shape, space, and motion, these abstract avenues to communicate physically with people, suddenly I had this sense of power. That's what I wanted, power. No, just that sense of really connecting with someone and having a lot of fun. And can you have abstract meaning? I found meaning in just doing circles with people, or straight lines, or having jagged shapes or rounded shapes. I found meaning in that combination, and yet there was no literal meaning to it. It was all this abstract feeling of connection that I would get from improvisation. So it just changed my life, really totally changed my life. So after 1 year of doing this, being in university during the day and taking these dance classes at night, I just flipped it and started dancing full-time, 5 days a week. Actually, it ended up being from 1 to 5 every day down in New York City with Nikolai. Became obsessed, and that was it. That was my change.
It's interesting how often a sort of a boundary or a sort of a deficiency or a difficulty, your hearing difficulty or your broken leg, and how that kind of pushed you into a place, and how you moved towards the need to express in another form. And it's almost like it was sort of dammed up, and then when you found your green light, you just rushed into it. I really think that's such a heartening story and such a positive one, Al.
Yeah, to me, it's interesting. I make these. So when I say the improvisational theatrically happened there, but I'm sure of going way back when, during my life, there's just the idea to go take a dance class out of I was a New York suburban Jewish kid, didn't have any, my parents weren't artists in any sense. They were beautiful parents, but there was I didn't have any really cultural upbringing. So the culture just emerged as soon as I started dancing with Nikolai. But the idea to go into a dance as a male, to get caught up in the dance world, was pretty strange, but it was a very quick decision. As soon as I felt I liked doing this dance stuff. I've always been, I call myself a very unreasonable person. My wife, Lynden, is a very reasonable person. She really looks at things from all different sides before she does something. She wants to make sure she knows what she's doing. And I just say, oh, I like this. Boom, I'll go do that. And that's been the essence. So I've been in the essence of me as an improviser kept popping up. The idea to do dance in New York, just flip over and just don't worry about whether I'm going to be making a living or not. And, just follow the fun. That's what I did.
Al, quite a lot of people know of you and know of your history already, but many watching this podcast won't. I want to acknowledge the book that you've written, The Wonder of Improvisation, and there's a documentary of the same name made by Michelle Dunn. There's also a book published, The Emotional Improvisation of Al Wunder by Hilary Elliott, which was quite a substantial text, I understand. But I'm wondering if you could fill in a little bit more of these seminal days in New York for you, and then when you came to Australia, how you started to teach, and how it progressed over those many, many years.
Okay, well, that beginning in New York was really, it had a couple of amazing incidences. Number one, that choice to study doing dance during the daytime. So I had maybe about 50 hours of dance training before that. And I go in and I'm told that Nikolai wanted me to join in the rehearsal process. He was putting together one of his theater pieces, and he wanted to use a larger cast. So with 50 hours of dance experience, I was asked to be in, it wasn't Nikolai's company, they call it the Henry Street Theater Company, but I was asked to be in one of his pieces of choreography. So all of a sudden, I'm not only being a student, I'm going to be performing in Nikolai's company, basically. Very strange. He must have, I found out later that he was peeking through a window that was on the door into the classroom that I was doing with Gladys Palin. So he saw something. And he invited me. I needed males. There's always males needed in companies. So I got that. The other thing, see, one of the real beautiful things about Nikolai as a teacher, as a mentor, is that he required his students not just to be dancers. He wanted them to be the whole package, to be dancers, to be teachers, to be choreographers. And so my first year during the day session, I had technique, I had improvisation, I had was assisting a teacher in assisting teaching someone, Phyllis Lamet. I assisted her for 2 years, and then I started teaching my own classes. And I was choreographing. And Nikolai even, this is a beginning, Nikolai even one day, the only time he ever did this, he had a drum making class. So his students had to go down into the basement, and he instructed us how to make drums by using cow skins soaked in water for a day and stretched over various size bowls. So that was my first drum, came from that. And then, so I assisted Phyllis for 2 years. I had my own children's class for another 2 years. And then at the beginning of a semester, I went up to our administrator, Betty Young, and I said, Betty, can you ask me, can I teach one of the evening adult classes? I think I really would like to teach adults. And she smiled at me and she said, well, that's very good, Al, because Nikolai is going away, he's taking his company, and he wants you to teach the professional classes. I had never taught an adult in my life, and all of a sudden I'm going to be teaching Nikolai's professional adult classes. And it was that Nikolai had the previous year, he traveled with his company around the United States, and he attracted this huge bunch of quite good university dancers to come to New York to study with him. And so my first class was with 30 hotshot dancers wanting to study with Nikolai. That first class out of 20, 30 people, 5 or 6 or 7 people just left in the middle of class. And for the ensuing weeks, I begged Nikolai, please, I got to stop teaching. I need more experience. He said, you're doing fine, keep going, you'll be okay. And I kept going, and it became okay. But again, it was Nikolai seeing something I didn't see. And yes, so that was my dance. I did two danced in 2 theater pieces of Nikolai's, and then he wanted a traveling company and cut down, and so I was cut out because I just wasn't good enough physically. And I knew that, and that was fine. But I kept teaching. I kept teaching then for another 6 years. And then this is a good thing too. The epiphany, an epiphany happened when I was teaching, and in one of the improv sections of classes, I came up with an idea that had nothing to do with what I had learned from Nikolai. And it was a big hit. It was a simple idea. I had, there were 4 quintets that were going to be done, 20 students, 4 quintets. I had them go up into the performing space and all be still in a slightly uncomfortable shape. They were, as a group, to hold that stillness as long as they possibly could. And when they couldn't hold it anymore, they would do a big, huge movement. And it was whoever started first, everybody was to explode with them. Simple idea. And all 4 quintets were beautiful. So it had nothing to deal with time, shape, space, and motion. It was just something that I just wanted to see what would happen out of that thing of stillness. Of course, all the students we had all worked with Nikolai's time, shape, space, and motion. So we all had that language where we could fit in together. But to make, to see what was coming out of this strange score. So I said, ooh, that sort of started me off on trusting my own improvised scores, if you will. That got me started on my own path.
I think often it's accidents and these little moments that can change our direction. And I think creativity is a lot to do with little accidents. So what was the accident that landed you in Australia, Al?
The accident that landed me into, okay. A marriage of convenience was one of the first ones. I had a student, I taught a summer workshop in the University of Minnesota or Minneapolis. I got mixed up which one. I think Minneapolis. And in that, I was teaching choreography along with my good friend Bob Beswick, who was part of Nikolai's company. And this woman, Zandy Acton, came with him from New York. I was already in San Francisco at the time. And Zandy came with Bob to do that course. I came from San Francisco to help Bob teach the course. I went back to San Francisco and Zandy tagged along with me. Bob went back to New York to work with Nick and Nick's company. Zandy studied with me 5 or 6 years. She married this guy who's sort of famous in Australia, this Joe Dolce, the big one-hit wonder, Shut Up With Your Face. And Zandy went back to Melbourne. She lived in Melbourne. She went back to Melbourne probably around 77, 78. She invited my soulmate, really. Ultimately, she became my soulmate, Terry Sendgraff, to come teach a trapeze workshop in Melbourne. Terry said to me just before she left, I'm going to go to Melbourne to teach my motivity. I felt this poing go off in my head. Something was going to happen. Terry came back 3 weeks later. She said, there's a woman coming to study with me. you're going to fall madly in love with her, which I did. And that was Lynden Nichols. So Lynden came over. We fell madly in love. So Terry told Lynden that she had a friend in San Francisco that she would really like. So it was preordained, actually, that I would eventually end up in Melbourne. So it's this Zandy acting. I married Zandy just to keep her. I'm sorry, I left out that little bit. I married Zandy so she could stay in the States and continue studying with me. And so that's the connection. That's the start of my Melbourne happening. A marriage of convenience.
And when you tell us then something about your teaching in Melbourne from when you started, maybe a Cubitt Street, Cecil Street. So a little bit of the history, but I'm also there's something about how you conceptualize improvisation, your approach to sort of helping people make sense of it and find their particular style. So there's sort of style aspect, and then your positive feedback model has been so central to your teaching and to empowering students to find their own way and to develop as improvisers. We'd love to know more about that. Can you speak about those two things, about how you conceive of and how the positive feedback model is so central to people's development?
There's so many, there's so many things that little threads that come in from here and there that make things happen. So it's just like, I can go back way to the beginning and really get too involved with the talking. Let's see. For me, probably one of the initial thoughts about positive feedback generated from when I decided to try to stop teaching dance technique through theory, through improvisation. And I said, okay, I'm just going to forget about the dance technique part. I'll do improvisation as a performing art in and of itself. And when I made that decision, I also changed from teaching 3-month-long performing workshops to 1-month-long performing workshops with a performance at the end of each month. And when I did that, I was also, at that time, I took up this format that I had when I did belly dancing for a year. I did belly dancing to help me work out a bad back. And the teacher I took she had this 1-month-long sessions. You pay for 4 classes, plus you get a one-on-one private session with her. So it's that format that I was through her that my class format began, these short-term performing workshops. And if I'm going to have lots of performing, the basic thing that I believed necessary to perform is to be non-judgmental about what you're doing, to get rid of the negative judge and worry about whether you're performing well or not. And when I make things up, I do something very obvious. So to me, the most obvious way to get rid of the negative judge is not talk about what went wrong, but talk about what went right, or get rid of the right and wrong attitude, actually, and just talk about what did you enjoy doing? What did you like doing? What did you like seeing as an audience? What did you like doing as a performer? And that was the beginning. And it worked. It was working. But also what was happening, I suddenly realized, wow, there's a real learning, teaching tool right there in the actual feedback that you give as a performer, that you give as an audience, is you develop a language. You work on developing your language that will help you personally to develop your own personal style, your own authentic way of self-presentation, and to evolve yourself from what you enjoy, both as a doer and watcher. To me, the doer, the performer, or even within the what I call my partnering section of classes, when there's just impulsive play going on, just to clarify those things that you like doing and why you like doing it, and what do you do, what are you actually doing, that you like, to put that sort of detail into the things you like doing. It's not just say, well, I like this and I like this and I like this, but I like this because I was running, and I was running really quick, and I really enjoy running quick. And I like touching all the four walls around the room. I like the excitement of that run. It gives me energy. And, so it's really starting to personalize your enjoyment and getting to know your enjoyment. As a doer, your self-teacher, I like running. I like going fast. That's really important to me. But what happens if I go slow against it? Can I feel that slowness against my speed have some meaning to me? Yes, it does. So they start expanding their vocabulary, and this is essentially by first understanding the things that they like doing. So an important part of the positive feedback is getting to understand their personal power sources. I feel that everybody has 4, 5, 6 personal power sources that has to do with, can be a body part. There was one person, this woman, Ruth, I think his name was, her eyebrows were her personal power source. She was an older woman. She couldn't, she had a very limited physical movement thing, but she would create character just by. And that was, that's so powerful. And then her stories came from that feeling. What's another strange one? Another strange one was this guy came into my class, smallish man, and he said he wanted to do classics because he was really, really shy. And after watching him do several things, I started realizing most of his movements had a strong sideward orientation. So his motion was to his side, much more sideward movement than most of us do, a bit more forward and back. And the very first solo improv he did in front of an audience, he did I forgot what his movements were before, but he stood in front of us a little bit scared, and then he smiled, and he just did a backflip, standing backflip. He was a trained gymnast, and he had that skill about him. And to build from that, is Andrew Morris, the talker. The first time I worked with him in a one-on-one situation, I had asked him and several people who were going to do a performance. The first, I had just come from from San Francisco, and Lynden had set up, got 8 people to do a performance piece that I would create. And I had them each pick a song. You got 30 seconds, pick a song that I want you to sing during the performance. I'll do something with the song anyway. And so that was the essence. I worked with Andrew. He told me the song he wanted to sing, and I asked him, tell me, why did you choose that song? And he started talking about why he would do the song. And I said, oh, this guy's got to talk. That's his, that's what he ended up doing, talking about the song, not actually singing it. So immediately there was that. I mean, he knew it. He knew he talks well. But the idea of that actually within a dance performance thing, he told me, or he said, you mean I can actually dance with my mouth? I said, yes, he could. He definitely could. So finding those personal power sources, developing your own style, talking not from the inside, what do you like doing, developing that. Then when you're an audience, talking about what you like seeing. What is it that turns you on? What is it that other people do? That's your inner director. That's the person who's going to go up with you and say, this looks good. I know, I've seen it from the outside. This looks very good. So I'll continue doing it. And also that outside feedback, you start what you enjoy other people doing. Somebody will do something that you had no idea of, that you would enjoy something like that. You had no idea what it was, but they were doing something. You liked it. You picked that up. That can become part of your vocabulary. So we learn from each other by doing things we like doing, by seeing things that we like being done, and our own little style emerges just from that sense of talking purely about what you like doing, what you like seeing, but adding the detail. What is it that I am liking and doing, seeing? So that's the basics of the positive feedback.
One of the signature things of our Wunder classes is your humdrumming. Al, tell us about the importance of drumming in your classes.
Well, as I said, I did that during my formative years as a dancer. Ruth Nikolais, all the teachers used drums. They did it was all skinhead drums, varying sizes and timbres of skinhead drums. So that was part of my psyche. And Nikolai had his drum making workshop. So I got to San Francisco, and that's a story in and of itself. Talk about irresponsible, or not irresponsible, but not taking the time to think things out. My friend Bob Beswick asked me to go to San Francisco with him and teach a Nikolai workshop. Great. I've never been outside of New York City, almost literally, was never outside of New York City for 26 years. I went with him to San Francisco. We stayed in a house in Berkeley across the bridge. 2 days after I arrived, I called my family and my friend and said, send my stuff over, I'm not coming back. There was something, I fell in love with this city, this culture that was so different from New York. And what was your question? I got lost in my own reverie there.
The importance of drumming in your teaching.
Of the drumming, yeah, okay. So I had taken with me this little hand drum, cheap $7 drum, and it just to teach with, and it just wasn't enough. So the skill of making drums was very simple. And at that time, one of the garden nurseries had these different sized Japanese round planter cakes from, 4 inches, 8 inches, 10, 12. I made a set of 4 drums with cowskins on them. And that was good. That was good playing those. And people liked them and they asked me to make them. So I started actually making drums as a sideline business. Then one day, one of my students had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend was a musician, and the boyfriend's name was Jim Nolman, and he called himself an interspecies musician, as well as playing for humans. He made music with timberwolves, with turkeys, with kangaroo rats, ultimately with whales and porpoises. And he was making these wooden drums. I've never seen them before. Made these wooden drums. It's all wood. He had some beautiful designs on top with many, many little cutout things that had different tones. And I loved it. And I said, oh, how do you make those? And yeah, you make a wooden box. You cut out whatever shapes you want on the top. Each one will be a different tone depending upon the length, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And I did. And I liked it. And I joined a cooperative woodworking shop in Berkeley, California. The huge shop, 6,000 square feet. There were about 10 or 12 of us had our own little cubby space. And so I learned the essence of working with woodworking tools, and started to make these boxes and design the different designs on top, which came very quickly. Very quickly I had 4 designs that I was making. And that was magic for me and for the students to have that sort of accompaniment. That's where the birth of the humdrums came from. The actual use of them, there's some people that didn't want me to accompany them when they were soloing. That was fine. But especially in my second part of my class, the partnering section, for me, the energy that the drum puts in the room, and I would do my own little relationship score. I would be watching certain people, and they would be in a certain energy, and I would respond to them, or I would initiate a change and see what happens. So this initiator responder role play would be happening back and forth. So it's a music. If I was accompanying a solo, it really, in a sense, was a duet. Especially if the people weren't talking. But then you got people who talk a lot, like your friend over there, Mr. Kevin, who talks a lot, or Andrew talks a lot, and there's not too many ways you can accompany him with a drum. But the drum for me was very, very special. It kept me connected with the people, and so I would connect with their emotional energy. They would connect with mine, and we'd have this interaction, abstract interaction, sound to movement.
Al, we're heading towards the latter part of our time together now, but I wanted to just bring to your attention just a small thing in the latter part of your book, and I think it's just wonderful. It's just a line that says, in relationship to teaching and performing, where impulse and style beget content. And I know that there's a lot behind this. Are you willing to just comment on that a little bit? Because it seems like a remarkable summation of how you approach teaching.
Yeah, I do mention in the book that to me, the confidence to be impulsive is the major tool. Well, to my way of thinking, the major tool of the improviser, the most important tool that they have is that confidence to be impulsive. And in my teaching, especially in my development of the one-on-one sessions that I have with people, I want them to just be totally impulsive and play. And then when we do feedback about what they've done, it's, again, finding what did you enjoy doing. And as soon as they start finding things that repeat themselves, quite often, I tell them, well, think about that as a possible personal power source. And when we agree, or when they say, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's a personal power source," I said, "Forget it. Go back to being totally impulsive. Play around until you find another 2 or 3 personal power sources. When you have 2 or 3 of them, you can see how they combine together, how they work, and you can start developing. You give yourself personal power scores to your personal power source. What are the things that are emerging as you play with that personal power source that allow you to go deeper and deeper into them and develop them further and further. And the combination of 3 or 4 personal power sources, that's your style. That's the style. That's, it's probably right there in the beginning, but to acknowledge it and to develop it is the steps that get your style to strengthen. In terms of content, or just the content? The content. Okay, well, the content, again, emerges. Like, I was intrigued when I finally realized that a lot of my content in my own personal performances had to do with death. There was a lot of my performances dealt with death in some way, shape, or form. And it was intriguing because death or sadness or isolation, again, hopping back to my teenage years, that was coming out a lot of my performing, and I got sick and tired of it. And then again, another sort of epiphany. Well, here we go. I obviously liked doing it because I kept doing it. So I coined the term negative personal power source. What is your negative personal power source? We all have something that we don't like about ourselves, and we don't want to show it, but it's a power source. And if you embrace it and give it that sense of power, it enriches what you do. It becomes theatrical. One of my favorite solo improvs I did, I was in Zurich, Germany, and I was working with a class of 30 people. And it was in one of that classes when I did a solo. And it started off, hello, goodbye. Oh, you know that every single hello you have said or will said will say in your life is going to end in a goodbye. Think about that. And I progressed to thinking of all the different hellos and relationships, short little term. You just run into somebody, have fun for half an hour, there's a goodbye at the end. I think at that time I said, when my son was born, and the first time I saw his face, there was, I said hello to him. And all our interchanges since then, many, many interchanges, there was hellos and goodbyes and hello, goodbyes. Ultimately, down the track, there's going to be a final goodbye. And there was an older man, I think he must have been 79. I was thinking maybe 89, but no, he must have been 79 at that time. I was younger then too. And he came up to me with tears in his eyes. I really hadn't realized the emotional depth that I had developed with that progression of hellos to goodbyes. So, and there was one beginning to I'm having all these revelations of my own little performing. I wasn't going to talk about my performing. There was one solo performance I did at Cubitt Street, and I started it off with the greatest gift that parents give their children is life. The greatest gift that grandparents can give their grandchild is their own death. That was the start. Thinking about it. Populations, I've always been really concerned about overpopulation. So we have to die in order to leave space to grow for the next generation. Does that answer your question of impulse, style, and content?
I think beautifully, Al.
I was wondering whether that's not the perfect place to say goodbye, Al. And like the man in Zurich, I'm very moved to hear some of your history and your stories, and get a sense of who you are, Al. So thank you so much for being with us today. Really, really beautiful.
It was my pleasure, really. Enjoy it.
Well, Al, I think we'd both like to honour what you have offered over these last 40 or so years, and to really acknowledge the major legacy that will you haven't gone yet, and you'll be around for quite a long time, I imagine, but the legacy that we all know exists and that you're able to chat about today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Quite a bit. Thank you for having me on the show.